Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. If you're a returning viewer, you'll be very familiar with this site. If you're a new viewer, this is New Yankee Auto Systems. My name is Sean. I want to take a second to introduce you to what we've got going on here. This is episode 13 of my Street Legal Legends car build nicknamed Petty Chevy. If you've caught up and watched all the other videos, you would have known that last week we left off working on some wiring on the vehicle. The general wiring harness was in a lot of disrepair. It just wasn't set up the way I liked, and I needed to have that fixed. However, I got stuck because I didn't have anywhere else to go. I didn't have any wiring schematics. Good news though, I have found a wiring schematic online that does break down the basic wiring for me. So hopefully we can jump right back in where we left off and try and get this starter wired up, try and get the rest of the wiring hooked up, and we're going to start testing some components. My hope for the end of this video is to have the engine start over and possibly do a compression test and then check out all the rest of the wiring. So, stop farting around, let's get stuck into it. On last week's episode, we got to a very good stopping point for what we could do given what we had and the information that we had too. You would have seen that I worked on the switch panel, making that removable and making it so that it had breakout points and could be easily disconnected. The other thing I worked on was chasing down this wire loom to the back here with this mess of wires that we have. I ended up identifying the main power and some other wires, and we also have a starter wire in here. So these are the connections I'm going to be working on to try and get the vehicle to at least start over and test some of the components. From there, we're just going to start troubleshooting where we need to. There's not going to be any possibility for the vehicle to start. There's no fuel. There's no fuel pump. I'll make sure to also disconnect the ignition coil, so we're really just trying to test and see if the vehicle will turn over. Good thing that I need to do first though is check and make sure there's some kind of oil in the vehicle before I start it.
5 minutes later.
Unfortunately, I can't seem to find any kind of dipstick on the engine. I can see what looks like an engine oil fill. So I'm going to leave that last bit of checking it until I can look into that a little further. What I'm going to focus on working on now is just what I came here to do, the electronic portion of this. And then see if I can't get this ground strap right on there. I feel like that's good, healthy, chunky spot to get a good ground as long as I can get some good contact on there. So that's what I'm going to start working on.
I marked out this spot on the chassis so that I could work with getting the paint off of here so that I could utilize this as my grounding point. Just wanted to make sure to mark it so I didn't take off too much paint and I kept in a small area to work for this ground strap.
Ultimately, when I verify that that grounding point and that grounding system works, I am going to get a star washer so that it'll bite into the metal to give a better ground contact. I think that it'll be a good spot. There are other spots on the chassis that are grounded or are served as ground, so I think this will be a good way to return everything back to the battery. Now that I've got a good electrical grounding spot, I'm going to go ahead and work on the rest of the wiring for the wiring harness that I have. So what I have got to focus on is getting this rear portion here of the wiring harness together. From what I can see, there's supposed to be positive power coming from the battery to one side of what is actually the starter solenoid. And then that power goes in a red wire all the way up to MAS. I'm guessing that's supposed to be master switch area, because this power does transfer through and go onto one side of the starter solenoid button, and then from the other side of that button it does come back as a yellow wire to this one side of the solenoid. So this pole of the solenoid is accepting the signal. This part of the solenoid, it's yellow on the document, but it is in fact gray or silver inside of the car. The other side of the solenoid is the actual power supply to the starter itself. So I'm going to start working on hooking up those components and see if, as I have those things hooked up, I start to actually get ignition power or 12-volt power source to some of those switch components. What I'm going to do here is work my way backwards. I'm going to get the starter wire hooked up first and repaired and get that set to a good, I don't know, just a good way to come off of the starter, get that redone just because it's the right way to do it. Once I've got that set where I want to and going through this hole in the firewall a little better, I'm going to go ahead and redo all the wiring here, work my way back. So as you can see, all that work that I did in the past couple weeks to get this wire loom sorted up a little better, it's just got to be redone, completely redone. I didn't have enough length at the back of the cable to get the starter hooked up. I don't know if someone pulled it at some point, cut it off, what the case may be. But I ended up having to just shoot the wire through the firewall, which is a better way to put it, instead of somewhere where it was a little closer to rub against. I'm going to be able to secure it better inside of the car, at the end of the car. So all I'm really working on right now is getting the correct length for that starter wire, and then I'll make sure to bundle everything back up and redo it, because doing it the right way isn't always the easy way. Hardly ever is, but I'm doing it the right way.
Make sure to tune in next week as I show you how I redid the wiring for the second time, making sure the entire wire loom package is better in the car. Got the switch panel hooked up and we've got power. So, we're going to give this a shot.
Fingers crossed.